that she's going to be talking about. The issues that she's going to be handling are issues that really matter quite a lot. I'm not going to waste your time by preempting this and that. I think it would be much better for me to comment after she has spoken. So let me just say it is our pleasure to welcome you. And over to you, Peggy Piesche.
Expressing my thanks for this great invitation. I really appreciate that to be here at Big Sound Festival. And my thanks goes especially to Susan. We're going long way back in our collaboration, and Nadia as well. And I see she's already working again somewhere. Well, this is my first time in Bayreuth. I've never been to Bayreuth before. And it's really interesting that by coming here and the starting of the organization and kicking off a conference or a festival, I noticed something which is, well, quite common to I think, some people here as well. Feeling lost in your own country. So I was very happy to run into people who I never met before, but we got together, we got our expertise together, and made our way. We got lost. Exactly, we got lost together and we found together. So that was a great start. It was really a great spirit. In preparing my talk for today, I was thinking about Bayreuth. And of course, as a German, you know Bayreuth. Only what you associate with is Wagner. What do I know about Wagner? Nothing, actually. But then I thought, I do know Wagner, and that is actually Wagner Cavallo, who is a Brazilian dancer and performer, and who just got announced to become the cultural leader of the Ballhaus in Berlin, one of the very important, it just was announced this week, very important transcultural cultural space and theater and intellectual space. So this is my relationship to Wagner, who I know very well, and I'm very happy for him. Well, and another note to begin with, something which also always happens, you change your title while working on it. So, and actually I changed it to be a little bit more precise. And so what I'm going to talk about is knowledge, notions of history, and the politics of memory. Because by working through that, I figured out the poetics of memory, that's great, but actually it is politics of memory what we're talking about, and I hope I can make that clear. As Susan already touched upon that briefly, I'm going to talk about Audre Lorde's work, and here in particular, Audre Lorde's Black internationalism and Black feminism in Germany. One of the most celebrated icons of feminism's second wave, Audre Lorde, inspired several generations of activists with her retrieving poetry, serving as a catalyst for change and uniting the communities of which she was a part. Black arts and Black liberation, women's liberation, and lesbian and gay liberation. Europe. As a staunch internationalist, she connected women across the US, the Caribbean, Europe, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. Also, as a Marxist lesbian and a feminist poet, Lorde grappled with her ambivalent relationship with European modernity by laboring in an interstice of genres. Since the problem of the colonial Black mind can at times be quite heavy, Lorde sought to get at its solutions through multiple forms, such as autobiographies, speeches, interviews, poetries, and much more. The multi-generic approach seems to produce many truths and that modernity ignores. In one discrete example, Lord recognized that political engagement could not be conducted in silence. Her essay, The Transformation of Silence into Language and Actions, suggests that the political draws in different sides: the doctor's office, the boardroom, the newspaper's column, the classroom, and the bedroom. And in these sides, the conscious should speak, if only because being politely mute would not delay death by 1 second. These are the types of insights which made Lord an invaluable figure within a black intellectual tradition and transnational movements. And I start by knowledge, counter-knowledge, and notions of epistemology, the politics of memory. Her inspiring words, activism, and creativity lives on through her writing and ideas, which continue to give strength to people all over the world. As Lord would argue, the production of knowledge is always a collective, rather than an individual endeavor, as we are all shaped by the things we picked up from people we've encountered in our lives. The term epistemology refers to the theory of knowledge that questions how we know how we acquire knowledge and how that knowledge is assessed. Lord focused largely on questions of who knows, how do we know, and what forms can knowledge take. In the context of Frere's pedagogy of the oppressed, we can understand her focus as knowledge to be for the purpose of liberation of the oppressed and societal transformation. Producing knowledge is, as Freire says, the practice of freedom. My understanding of knowledge also draws heavily from feminist critiques of the assumption of knowledge and is mostly clearly summed up by the authors of Women's Lives, Multicultural Perspectives, Quinn Kirk, and Marco Okasawa-Ray. And here are some of their main arguments they make in this groundbreaking volume. All knowledge is socially constructed. There is no value-free or neutral knowledge. Everyone has a capacity to be a creator of knowledge. What one knows comes out of the specific historical and cultural context, whether one is an insider or outsider to that context. It is the responsibility of everyone to reflect on, evaluate, judge the world around us and our places in that world as an essential element of theorizing. Knowledge should be used for the purpose of helping to liberate oppressed and transform current social and economic structures of inequality. These claims that knowledge is not neutral and that what we know is a product of a specific context and that anyone can produce knowledge automatically forces us to question Eurocentric epistemology and its assumptions. We are also forced to consider so-called non-traditional forms of knowledge, such as knowledge produced outside of the university, or for that matter, outside of the West. These points are central when discussing cultural and artistic productions of people of color, and especially women of color, who have been deemed to be incapable of producing true knowledge. Any project that seeks to break the silence of women of color, or any group of oppressed people, must therefore begin with this questioning of knowledge itself, in order to begin to create a world in which their words will be heard, understood, and valued. Knowledge is memory, biography, and activism. Audre Lorde's challenge and epistemic resistance can probably first be noted in her groundbreaking essay, The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action. An essay full of strength and dedication to speak out and about whatever must be spoken, regardless of the risk that it entailed. Lorde was a black lesbian poet, theorist, activist, mother, and leader who never saw these parts of her identity as separate. Rather, she understood identity to be whole and complex. As she said herself, and I quote, "I'm a black lesbian, feminist, warrior, poet, mother, doing my work. I underline these things, but they are just some of the ingredients of who I am. There are my others," unquote. The daughter of West Indian immigrants, Lord came from New York City when she experienced the marginalization of being a young black girl in the United States. After beginning a career as a librarian, Lord began teaching at Tagaloo College in Mississippi in 1968, where she experienced the deep racism of the South, as well as the black students' resistance to it. From then on, taught she at various schools and eventually became a full professor at Hunter College in New York, but continued to be a poet and writer. Lord was also a founder of the Kitchen Table Press, a woman of color-run press which produced works like The Bridge Called My Bag. She was always a dedicated activist outside of the university, involved in the women's movement, the civil rights movement, and the LGBTQ movement. According to Lord, a Eurocentric framework of knowledge limits black women's potential, devalues their lives and their erotic, poetic, and creative knowledges. Lord provides what has been called a subaltern, border thinking, or outsider perspective because of her position as a radical black lesbian feminist. This perspective allows a nuanced understanding of power and domination as well as resistance. For Lord, Eurocentric knowledge and knowledge validation processes are one of the master's tools. And that, of course, refers to her famous speech and essay from 1979, "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House." In Feminism Without Borders, Chandra Mohanty begins with a poem that Lord presented at Oberlin College and that revealed the contradiction of the global domination of the West. And I quote this from this poem. "The US and the USSR are the most powerful countries in the world. Most people in the world are yellow, black, brown, poor, female, non-Christian, and do not speak English. By the year 2000, the 20 largest cities in the world will have one thing in common. None of them will be in Europe, none in the United States." Mohanty explains that Lord has inspired feminists of colors by exposing the Eurocentric world within which we occupy, defined by destructive divisions, while also sharing the possibility of resistance. Mohanty argues that Lord serves as an example and a source of knowledge that is beneficial to all oppressed people. Yet, Audre Lorde's work and life have not been fully examined and is rarely being analyzed in this context of knowledge and memory. However, especially for the Black German movement, or to be precise, in the academic perception of the rise of this particular community, Audre Lorde became almost a prophetic figure which did not only help, but guided and shaped. Jennifer Michaels describes a widely shared view of the relationship of Audre Lorde and her Afro-German counterparts when she states, and I quote Michaels, "Not only did she help Afro-Germans organize as a community and encourage them to define their multiple biracial identities, but through her political thinking and her poetics, she also shaped the course of their writing. These women who were close to Audre Lorde have been among the strongest voices in the Afro-German movement," unquote. Also, Audre Lorde's influence on Afro-German women of the 1990s is unquestionable. The majority of scholarly work on Audre Lorde and the Black German community overlooks the passionate call for an international blackness, which can only be achieved through knowledge. Also, it is widely accepted that Lorde's work stresses a cultural understanding of race, gender, sexuality, and class. However, her realization that commonality of struggle does not necessarily imply that, and I quote her, we beat the same drum, is seldom being connected with her urge to find empowerment in the recognition of difference. In the foreword to the English edition of Father Buchanan, Showing Our Colors, Lord writes, and I quote her, "This book serves to remind African American women that we are not alone in our world situation. In the face of new international elements, vital connections and differences exist that need to be examined between African European, African Asian, African American women, as well as between us and our African sisters. The first steps in examining these connections are to identify ourselves, to recognize each other, and to listen carefully to each other's stories." Unquote. In almost all her writing and interviews on the topics of international Black women's movement, Lord stresses the notion of recognition, learning from each other, and the acceptance of differences, which ultimately leads to an international connection, community, to an international diaspora. These connected differences, I argue, are the main focus of Audre Lorde's work and involvement in other diasporic movements. It is not my interest to simply resent the common perspective of Audre Lorde as a pioneer for other Black movements who brought the African American experience to them, but rather to add another angle by focusing more on Lorde's theory. Her constant demand for breaking the silence and bridging some of those differences between us suggests that Audre Lorde was more interested in the strategies of an international Black movement than helping or shaping other communities. And I also included some poetry of hers, so I will read this here. Please excuse my voice. I'm dealing with some nature attacks here, which is quite different here from New York. It's terrible, really. Speechless. At the foot of the steps of forest, strong with breadcrumbs, fingers sticky with loss, stuffed with seductive chaotic songs, like a goose bound for the autumn, giddy trees wait shaken. In the wild arms of a twilled birch, the void of coarse moon hangs like a spotlit breast. Death falls the corners of my mouth into a heart-shaped star, sit on my tongue like a stone, around which your name blossoms, distorted. In the essay, The Transformation of Silence into Language in Action, Lorde talks about the relationship between differences between us and the silence, which immobilizes us. It is there when Lorde's constant demand to recognize international Black movements in their contributions to an own political movement for the African American community contextualize the questions Lorde discusses widely in her essay writings. To what extent do we embrace an intellectual tradition that has bequeathed us critical tools that may help us think our way into a better world, but also has produced ideas that have condemned our humanity and at times rationalized our death? How do we flourish within these contradictions and avoid the paralysis that ambivalence can induce? Lorde always stressed that knowledge is key, knowledge to survival. When Audre Lorde first met Afro-German women in 1984 and learned about their stories and rather isolated living conditions, she saw this also as a teachable moment for the African-American experience. And I quote, "What can we learn from our connected differences that will be useful to us, both Afro-Germans and Afro-Americans?" Unquote. In Showing Our Colors, she discusses the necessity of this particular knowledge which translates a collective experience of black people into a tool of survival. And I quote her again. In the interest of all of our survivals and the survivals of our children, these black German women claim their color and their voices. Unquote. Audre Lorde draws here a direct connection between the breaking of the silence and the notion of the transformation of knowledge. By publishing their stories and writing themselves into a larger historical discourse, these black German women offered facts, history, poetry, and therefore knowledge to their sisters and brothers that contribute to the complexity of a future global feminism and could be transformed into a collective memory of a growing black German community. Black German feminist thoughts against the colonial origin. Especially in the research and early writing of Maya Yim, the arguable most well-known author and poet who contextualized the German unification from a transnational perspective in her poem Blues in Black and White, these overarching themes in Audre Lorde's essayistic and poetic work are deeply present. And I quote from this poem, Blues in Black and White. A reunited Germany celebrates itself in 1990 without its immigrants, refugees, Jewish and black people. It celebrates in its intimate circle. It celebrates in white. But it's a blues in black and white. It's a blues. United Germany, United Europe, United States celebrates 1992, 500 years since Columbus, 500 years of slavery, exploitation, and genocides in the Americas, Asia, and Africa. Unquote. A celebration of history, of knowledge and memory, of the privileged minority, as Audre Lorde says, or as Maya Yim puts it, the 1/3 of the world. The poem from 1990 addresses already what later would be seen as a shift in the focus of the young black German movement, a political community which came together from alienated spaces, dislocation, and fear of isolation, allied with their sisters and brothers from the East, who, in the beginning of the changes in 1989, were optimistic and hopeful to be treated better in a freer Germany. This community began to position itself in a larger transnational community. Notions of belonging and home, the very German concept of Heimat, which was inscribed in the conceptualization of Afro-Germanists in 1986 with the book of Showing Our Colors, began to shift. The own community could not longer be comprehended, or could not longer comprehend itself national. And I quote again from my name. It's a blues in black and white. 1/3 of the world dances over the other 2/3. They celebrate in white. We mourn in black. It's a blues in black and white. It's a blues. Maya Yim illuminates the unification of whiteness, which became in a unified Germany an almost fascinating notion of exclusion of non-whites after 1990, different from the one of the National Socialism and rather more in the tradition of the Enlightenment and humanism. Audre Lorde understood these forms of knowledge, which she refers to as the European-American male tradition or the white father's knowledge. She understood that intersectionally as a form of knowledge not only catering to the white man, but also to the white woman at times. She regards this form of knowledge as dangerous for black women in particular because they are devaluated within their way of knowing. Within this context, Showing Our Colors marks a significant stage of transition in 1986, since it deliberately articulates a painful historical moment from the worst black predominantly female perspective, it has to be considered as the initial starting point of an emerging black German communal, as well as a black German feminist voice. Its liberating attempts to overcome, to impose discontinuity of a buried history brought into being a counter-historiographical space, as Laurie Alzamarai puts it, wherein completely new discursive fields evolved and by then literally unthinkable analysis of racialized social structures, dynamics, and dominant patterns of perceptions could finally begin. The painstaking research of activist and poet May Ayin advanced for the first time a framework of a critical periodization of Black German history by focusing attention on the continuing presence of Black people in Germany during the 20th century. Furthermore, as Sarah Lennox argues, and I quote her, it's a longer quote, the relocation of the widely repressed German colonial heritage and the discussion of its intellectual, cultural, and interpersonal consequences prove the complex contemporarities of this particular era. It convincingly revealed that it was and is the colonial experience which still established multi-layered cultural maps, which was echoing dominant and subjective historices, which inseparably ties black and white German histories, and which constitute the historical and the ideological base of the violent relational encounter inscribed into the past and present realities of black and white people in this country, unquote. This is what Lord describes as the process of decolonizing knowledge, which requires taking a part of Eurocentric ways of knowing, as well as providing alternatives to it. Lord repeatedly asked black women worldwide to develop an alternative epistemology and methodology which challenge Eurocentric ways of knowing. While Eurocentric knowledge values scientific knowledge, objectivity, and reason, it becomes clear through Lord's work that all of these standards of knowledge are questionable. Lord demonstrates the possibility of a black feminist epistemology and methodology which values the use of experience, emotion, and poetry. These forms of knowledge, which are devalued, have been essential forms of expression for women of color. And I quote her, "When we create out of our experiences as feminists of color, women of color, we have to develop those structures that will present and circulate our culture," unquote. Life experiences have been an essential tool of theorizing for black women, particularly in regards to issues of domination and resistance, because it has been essential to their survival. And another famous poem from her, Diaspora. Afraid is a country with no exit visa, a wire of ants walking the horizon, embroiders our passports at birth, Johannesburg, Alabama, a dark girl flees the cattle cross, skin hanging from the shredded nails, escapes into my nightmare, half an hour before the Shatila dawn, wakes in the world of the borrowed Volkswagen. Or a rickety midnight sleeper out of White River Junction, Washington bound again, gulps carbon monoxide in the false bottom truck, fording the Crescent France, or an up-country river, Grenada's Pelt Try and Calabash leaving. And I really thought I had more time. In an interview with Charles Rowell, Lord explains, and I quote, "A poem grows out of the poet's experience in a particular place and a particular time,
And the genius in the poem is to use the texture of that place and time without becoming bound by them. Then the poem becomes an emotional bridge to others who have not shared that experience. Unquote. For Lord, knowledge is not neutral. Life experience is necessary and crucial for creating theories that remain true to black women. It is in this spirit that Lord saw the value and the contribution of Afro-German women in the 1980s, particularly showing our colors went against the Eurocentric framework of knowledge and offered especially black women in the West an opportunity to engage in an alternative epistemology. And I will just go to my last part. We'll come back to that in the discussion then. Creating out of experience, feeling as part of knowledge. Our feelings are our most genuine path of knowledge. Lord demonstrates here in Sister Outsider, which is a collection of her work and also a poem, that Eurocentric knowledge creates categories of the inferior in order to benefit the superior, or the West, the bourgeois and the male. Lord understands this knowledge not only to be Eurocentric, but also patriarchal, which devalues women of color the most. Lord's work provides rich theories of difference and intersectionality, and her theory of knowledge links directly to an international recognizing and understanding of blackness. She sees this as an essential communication which creates a meaningful feminist community. Lord stresses the notion that, and I quote, as outsiders, we need each other for support and connection and all the other necessities for living on the borders, unquote. Especially for us in the West, the idea of the worldwide coalition seems to be crucial. And I think that is something which is really preaching to our diasporic topic here, and I quote her. We are members of an international community of people of color and must see our struggle as connected within that light. Lord argues to identify ourselves, to recognize each other, and also to look to our African sisters and brothers. Asking essential questions about where our strengths and differences intersect, Lord understood her involvement with the Black German feminist movement as a learning process toward an international diaspora. And I quote, I see these women as a growing force for international change in concert with other Afro-Europeans, Afro-Asians, Afro-Americans. And my conclusion. And I quote, Lord, poetry is not only dream and vision, it is the skeleton architecture of our lives. It lays the foundation of the future of change, a bridge across our fears of what has been before. Lord recognized the importance of poetry not as a luxury, but as a form of knowledge which had possibilities that other forms did not have. While poetry has been considered a non-objective and oftentimes less rational form of expression than prose, it is not acceptable to make a knowledge claim in the form of poetry. Poetry, however, as Lord points out, has been an essential means of expression for women, especially for Black women. Lord describes this in her childhood memory as following. I used to speak in poetry. I would read poetry and I would memorize them. People would say, well, what did you think, Audrey? What happened to you yesterday? And I would recite a poem, and somewhere in that poem there would be a line or a feeling I would be sharing. In other words, I literally communicated through poetry. And when I couldn't find the poems to express the things I was feeling, that's what started me writing poetry, and that was when I was 12 or 13. This statement directly draws the connections between thinking, knowledge, memory, and poetry. For Lord, she was about to produce knowledge through poems. While poetry is typically thought of as an art form, with Lord it rises to means of theorizing, one that is not limited by the assumptions of authentic masculine knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I go any further, I would like to start off by also thanking Jaco Tina for the music that he provided for us. I think we should take that. And now getting to the paper, we're going to welcome questions, but before I go there, I think it is only fitting that we try and just link up what Peggy was trying to bring to us. And I think it is very fitting that we're talking about Lord at this time, because I think the whole issue of can the masters of, can the tools of the master undo the house of the master is an issue that one almost gets to feel as if it became cliche, but talking about it now brings it again into the, brings her work into the issue, into the public space again. And I think listening to what Peggy was commenting, I think it was very important that a key word was how knowledge is produced. How is knowledge produced, and the fact that it is not a neutral process. It depends a lot on context. It also depends on who is producing that knowledge. And I think since we are talking about memory, that also brings on to the question of who is remembering and what are they doing with the memory and what kind of remembering are they doing. I felt that the thing that is key about Audrey, you look at the kind of feminism that she was talking about, how she links identity and questions of international feminism. What exactly are we talking about there? And I think as we frame our questions, what should be good for us to also look at is the whole question of memory and temporality. How does time intersect with what we are calling memory? Whether we are going to remember progressively, or are we going to look at it backwards? What kind of truths, so to speak, are we constructing? And I think every day, what was taken for granted is being proved not to be true. And I always laugh at the fact that at a certain time, people who were saying the world is flat, it's not flat and it's round, were laughed at until at a certain point, where somebody did research. And now, for those of us who are doing research in same-sex issues in Africa, know how many times you actually have to tell people that, look, sex has no identity, it has got no nationality, it is sex, end of story, So to come and tell me that, you can't be this and being Malawian is very difficult, But people have got so many stories of what they think they remember from the past. And I think as we investigate this, it's good to remember that unfortunately memory can also be a very selective process. People can choose what they say they remember, especially when memory intersects with nation, intersects with so-called the culture story, And I think what we have been listening to from Peggy, makes us ask questions. What is it that we are talking about on top of memory, and what truths are we constructing? Because it so happens that knowledge production is an issue of power. Knowledge is used to construct institutions, to get status, to have identity. So the question is, how does what she has, Audrey talked about, how does it intersect with what we call memory? I would really like to thank, there's so much that Peggy put on our plate here, how poetry lays a foundation of change and thinking of knowledge production. But I also know that I have an audience richer in memory than mine, so I'm going to give you a chance to give us questions. What I just wanted to make sure is, when she answers, does she answer from the podium, or do you want her to come here? There's a microphone that you go to. Okay, so she'll answer at the end, maybe, right? No, actually, I think it's as I invite questions, because I was going to say maybe we can have a set of questions, then she comes here and answers, and that way, yeah. So, I know you are just teeming with questions, so ask away. I can't imagine. I see so many hands up, I don't even know which one to pick. Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the inspiring presentation. Audre Lorde was always inspiring, and by remembering her, you remember me. Also, we call it the need to be inspired. Very simple question. When you said that Audre Lorde met Black German, Afro-German women, how did she go about meeting them? How did she go forward? Should we collect or should we?
Audre Lorde came in 1984 for a series to Germany for a series of guest lectures at the university in Frankfurt and later also in Berlin. And she was, of course, as already a very well-known theorist and activist in the United States. I mean, it was 1984, and her famous speech at the Simone de Beauvoir conference was in 1979, so it was just 5 years later. So she was drawn into the, we always speak about West Germany here in 1984, into the West German feminist movement. So in these meetings, the feminist movement was perceived as, well, white equals Germany. But then she was surprised, as many others too, to find black German feminist activists coming to these meetings. And that was when she met black women, and they got together, and then the rest is history.
Thank you as well for all the connections you have already made for our conversations here. I wanted to ask you about the fact that Audre Lorde herself was a contentious figure in all of the communities you cited that she's a member of. And I wanted to think about questions such as authenticity, the most authentic path, and identity, and even who defines progressive politics. These are always contentious matters, including among progressive communities. And she mapped out spaces that were edgy and dangerous, being a poet, being a lesbian, being a transnationalist, at a moment when nationalism was the path of resistance. So, being an eroticist, my favorite essay of hers is The Uses of the Erotic. So I wonder what we can take from her that does not lie comfortably within the authentic, within the unified, and what she offers to us as people who, in our own communities, multiple as they are also facing very difficult, simultaneous, fractured political challenges, and how she also mapped a path that was not the expected one, even within those communities.
Thank you very much for this very complex comment. And well, you were raising a lot of questions in the a lot of very complex concepts. I mean, authenticity is already a very problematic or ambivalent concept. Identity, and the question who defines. And I would absolutely agree that she was a contested figure in all the communities where she placed herself. And I think for the reasons for what we can take out of her work and really out of her theory and her poetry is that she challenged also the notion of the hegemonic agency within the diaspora. Something very uncomfortable. And still, I mean, in the 80s, when she basically challenged us and said, well, we are not just black people, we are also people in the West. So we need to define our position towards our brothers and sisters of Africa. And we have, even within the West, we have hegemonic agency. It's not very comforting while fighting all of this obvious fights and necessary fights to acknowledge that we still carry all that hegemonic agency is inscribed in us, and that by fighting the pyramid of power, we are somewhere also located at that. And that was very contesting, of course. And what I also see reading her essays is questioning or problematizing the notion of modernity, and not having simple answers, but actually saying we are in a dilemma here. Modernity is a concept of the West, or at least it was so much claimed by the West, that it is very, very problematic to achieve a numbers Western modernity which is not immediately intertangled with the West. And that's what we see with all the contemporary topics. And what we had here was, I think Audre Lorde talked about or raised issues in the framework of intersectionality before it was called intersectionality. To say that this is what, you know, what we find even now, after 20 years after her death, what we see, what makes it so problematic to talk about. Let me just say a couple of examples. Charles Taylor's conviction in Den Haag, or what's going on in Uganda. It's all not that easy because we are so intertangled, and I think also what Jesse was talking about, that even in post-colonial time period, we are still busy to decolonizing our minds and claiming something, this is not us. That's very problematic. That's a very strange memory. So we are very twisted. We are already, you know, so twisted into the memory of modernity, which is the West. So I think that is all what she brought up, and didn't have easy answers, and that's why she was very contested. And yes, indeed, who defines? We still have that, even in the perception or the memory of Audre Lorde. You know, we still have that. Who defines that? Who is allowed to speak? And how does this also change history? I mean, that's what we said. What do we accept? What do we accept as what can we remember? And so I think that what we also see in her poetry is that we have this huge task on those, developing an alternative framework of knowledge or epistemology, but yet still have to do this daily fight of fighting and digging against the hegemonic notion of knowledge, because it's so much inscribed in us.
Thank you very much. Once again, I'm just inundated by the hands. I can't believe it. All of you people want to talk. Can you believe that? Okay, people, we have 10 minutes actually, and I think there's so much to talk about. At least for me, the problem has always been how to shut me up and how to get me to talk. So, so I'm looking at these 10 minutes and saying, let's not waste them. And I think so far what I'm gathering, I think the issue of memory, and I think I always say to people, When I talk of, I hear people talk of reparation to say they want to get money for what happened, I always say I don't know what figure I will put to it, because to tell the truth, the mutilation and the infantilization that some of us, so to speak, have internalized is very, very, it's difficult, because you're talking about history, where you say, I'm not this, you know, I'm just not that. You know, Malawians are just not gay, you know. I come from Malawi, and for some reason, someone thinks when they were drawing that map that says, this is Malawi, somehow they just put all heterosexuals together. And, they just put all of them. And everybody else, other sexualities, they went somewhere else. The Casta Simenians, that's why they're in South Africa. You know, they are not in Malawi. You can't have that in Malawi. And it always makes me laugh. Like I say, look, whatever it is we call Malawi, Africa, these are all colonial constructions. How the hell are we going to argue that only people of this, are this kind? And when you talk of Audrey, I'm very happy that Kawewa brought up the issue of protection. That unfortunately now there's even, you mentioned Audre Lorde, there's a certain connotation that comes just when you say Audre Lorde. And the question here would be, I mean, what questions for you, what does she invoke, you know, when you listen to this? Because I think scholarship is about pushing boundaries and us not, you know, making sure that her as an institution and as a knowledge production tool, we are looking at this and saying, there's some space that I would like to get more explanation of exactly what did she mean by this, you know? Just like the example of the tools of the master cannot. You take it into language. When you intersect what Audre Lorde said with what Ngugi has said, there's been lots of debate there to say, so should we speak English when we are doing research? Because that's a tool of the master, you know? And some say, no, but how do we understand each other? Because I'm from Kenya and the other one is from South Africa. How the hell do we understand each other? So I don't know, there are so many issues. You know, I think a research on Audre Lorde is always loaded, at least for me, because I think she was one of the few who was radical, who stood her ground to say, this is how I see it, you come and get me, and they did. You know, they would come and say, no, you can't say this, you can't say that. So I don't know, especially the Afro-German and, you know, meeting Afro-Germans and Afro-Americans, what links were worked out there, that's another very fertile area for research. And I know that this room is full of not only academics, so please, even those who want to ask questions that they are wondering, will this fit into the theory of this? It doesn't matter. Just ask anything that you feel, you know, tickles you, or you want a detailed explanation. Peggy will be only too happy to explain. Okay. I do have one hand. Thank you, please.
Thank you very much for that, JC and Peggy. I'm excited by you're talking about Audre Lorde as both disruptive and her prophetic vision. And I'm also I'm trying to hold several things at the same time and just think about how the different categories or kind of movements speak to each other. I'm struck on the one hand by the way in which Audre Lorde's, what you're calling a prophetic vision, continues to disrupt so much, not just about what is hegemonic, but also about how we do the business of contesting power and creating knowledge that's affirming and interesting. And I mean, it's interesting how Luca said one of her favorite essays by Lorde is the uses of the erotic. Because of course it's the one that I have the hardest time working. It's the one that I have found the hardest to engage with. For different reasons. I suppose one of them is that as someone who works on sexuality, I agree about kind of Lorde's prophetic vision and you know the constant invitation to think about imagination and kind of radical politics, transformative politics at the same time. But while I recognize that, I'm also still never quite sure what it means exactly to think about, even as we do kind of sexuality research and very disruptive work in other non-academic, academic as well as non-academic places. So that's the second complaint.
The third is the way in which, like you suggested, Lord has also become quite iconic within the global anti-racist feminist movement, global queer, all the intersections. I'm not trying to become like feminist, queer, obviously, with all those intersectionalities. And I'm interested in what your thoughts are about why she continues to generate leaking meanings. I'm borrowing the phrase from Fabrica, even as she is in the process of canonization. So on one hand, there's this absolute recognition. She is the global feminist icon for black women globally, and so on. We all speak about her all the time, right? At the same time, even though we recognize her and love her and adore her and are inspired by her she nonetheless continues to resist this tide to canonization, which we sometimes are able to do with other disruptive voices. Okay, that's a very untidy question, but maybe in some senses it is very long-esque.
It is, and I'm not sure if I really can manage it. Well, maybe beginning with the end, with the last. I'm not so sure if she's in the process of canonization. I'm really not that sure about that. Because, being in multiple communities and activist communities, there, her work is discussed and is passed on, but not really. I'm just putting together a book on her, which will come out in fall. Just when the publishing house, when they met with their, the selling people, I don't know who they are, the marketing, yeah, how they call it in English. That are very tried, very focused people looking at numbers, and they say, well, this is not sellable. It's a niche, and we make the book because it will appear in, come out in Orlando Verlag, Orlando Publishing House, where showing our colors. The first book came out, where my Blues work came out. So it all makes sense, and it is, of course, in commemoration of the 20th anniversary of her death. But in a wide, general perception, I don't see neither her nor her ideas. So that's just one observation. For the rest, why the ambivalence still with Audre Lorde, or why is she, for that matter, maybe even hipper in some other subcultural communities? Maybe it has something to do with the question Jessie poses in the beginning. How does time intersect with what we call memory? Audre Lorde was a pioneer in the way that she spoke about a lot what was at the time not on the agenda, like to be transnational, to be not seeing diaspora as something which has to be really cemented into the national, to be really to say. In the 70s, the project was we really have to lay a fundament in the US, or then it slowly opened to the Caribbean. In the beginning in Germany, it was about not only creating a positive name and terminology, but it was also to revisit and really analyze this notion of Germanness. And in this time, she offered something which was like, how are we going to do that? I mean, now we are hopping to Asia and we're hopping to that, and we can't even connect between Düsseldorf and Berlin or so. And this is something which is, of course, appealing, because with time changing, now everything is all about transnational. I mean, it's so totally not cool anymore to be national, not only for people of color. I mean, it's really, also we have a backslash right now. I mean, right now it's this stupid soccer thing. I mean, it's apparently just very cool to be national for a week, a month or so, which is very disturbing, but that would be another talk and a whole different conference. But I think that is something which is inspiring to see that 30, even almost 40 years later, that not only, oh, this is still important, but it also, I think it opens up the opportunity to look at each other in a different way. You know, if I don't understand my counterpart, I might remember that and think, you know, maybe it's something which I can't understand right now because it's a limited framework, but it has something to tell me in 5 years from now or in 10 years. So I think that might be it. And in terms of, well, of course, probably the most complex notion of sexuality in here, in her work, I deliberately put in the terminology of queer life, also it was not at the time, because I think that's what she also tried, without which I think is very inspiring too. You can not only live something, but also you can verbalize something, theorizing something without a certain terminology. So, and it's not, and sometimes it seems for me that we are living in times where the terminology is created first and then we fill in something, which I certainly see with transgender right now. So, and maybe just the last thing. In general, I think what Open can offer us was all different angles from wherever you want to approach it, through the writing of sexuality, the poetry, the transnational perspective. It shows us the need, or I think by really trying to understand that we have the feeling of that what it is all about is to further our diaspora literacy. And that's something to understand actually diaspora as literacy, as something which, yes, we have to learn. It's not just given to us, because then we are stuck in the national. I think that's...
Thank you very much. I would like us to have a big hand for Peggy for helping us. Flash forwardly, and I think you wanted to say something? Okay, thank you very much. I think our next session starts in about 10 minutes. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience. I wish you a better transition with the next session. Thank you. Thank you.